Good morning, comrades. How we doing today? Oh, you like me because I run late? G Wolf, you're too kind. We got Jacob Morrison in chat from the Valley Labor Report, the one and only. We love the Valley Labor Report around here. We actually have some very exciting labor news for today to talk about in just a moment. What's up, Discount Seth Rogen? First time in here, I see. How you doing today? It is a beautiful Friday, and I have a lot going on today. I'm pumped for this weekend. Ready to celebrate America, just like we always do. Every single day on Good Morning Comrade, but here we are. But yeah, just to kind of get us rolling. Sorry, I had a kind of crazy morning, so if I'm a little bit like slapped together today, that's why. It's just been a wild one. But I want to highlight this really kind of important issue. Here we go. Sorry. Yeah. So New Orleans firefighters actually showed up yesterday at a city council meeting. I didn't see a write up for it in anywhere, but I saw it on Twitter. So I'm going to look at, I know Step Up Louisiana was on one of the things. yeah. So basically, this is the best that we got as far as that. So in the city of New Orleans, we have this sort of like odd situation where we've tried to get a $15 an hour minimum wage sort of like across the board for the city. And then that was sort of like shot down by the state of Louisiana by what is called statewide preemption. So the state legislature basically decided, actually, city of New Orleans, you don't have local democracy. You can't do that. You can't have $15 an hour minimum wage in the city of New Orleans. You don't have the authority to make that decision because we're overruling you in the state legislature in small government Louisiana or whatever. Big government of Louisiana decided no. But now we have a situation where we have approved a $15 minimum wage for contractors to the city, but not city employees. And we talked yesterday about some city workers that had walked off the job for one day. They did a 1 day sort of a sick out. They kind of called it a strike. And they I mean, they made had a really great statement that we read from the New Orleans City Workers Organizing Committee, who were, a lot of those workers are without a union right now. So we had this organizing committee that sort of sort of fills a little bit of that space until we can get those folks organized into unions. And now we have this article from yesterday. City Council approves $15 minimum wage only for city contractors, but city employees say they deserve the same. New Orleans City Council unanimously voted on Thursday to amend the city's living wage ordinance and raise the minimum wage for city contractors from the current level of $11.19 an hour to $15 an hour. Now, the $11.19 is higher than the state minimum wage, which is basically equivalent to the federal minimum wage, which is $7.25. But that's still not sufficient. I mean, nobody can live off of that kind of money. It's not very much. The ordinance received universal support among the council and public commenters, but the discussion at Thursday's meeting was dominated by concerns about what the ordinance does not cover: the wages of direct city employees. City council doesn't have the authority to unilaterally raise the minimum wage for city workers. That's up to the Civil Service Commission. So basically, remember when the Democrats tried to make a part of their government funding bill $15 an hour, but they had like a parliamentarian come in and say, no, you can't do that. That's against the rules. That's basically what happened here. The city council has their own parliamentarian sort of situation that basically like a technical workaround where the city council basically can say, oh, look at that, we can't do anything. We can't give you $15 an hour because that damn Civil Service Commission won't do anything about it. Same thing happened in the minimum wage in Birmingham. Also in Alabama, state legislature preempted Confederate statue removal, passed a law saying you can't take down statues or any structures more than 40 years old. What the hell? Like, that is crazy. Like, most statues are probably more than 40 years old, right? Dozens of firefighters showed up and attended on Thursday's meeting, holding signs reading, "I'm a firefighter. My family deserves a living wage too," next to their hourly wages, some of which were as low as $11.60 an hour. Can you imagine this? You were expected to run in potentially to a burning building to save somebody, to save people. And the amount of money that the city of New Orleans is going to pay you is less than a living wage. Less than $11.60 an hour. Good God. Good morning, Penelope. A group of field maintenance workers for the city's Department of Public Workers also lodged complaints about their exclusion from the living wage amendment this week and staged a 1 day strike. We talked about that just yesterday. That took place on Tuesday, I believe. Demanding better working conditions as a minimum wage of $15 an hour. Quote, we just want to be recognized as being worthy of a living wage along with everybody else, Aaron Mishler, president of the New Orleans Firefighters Association, said on Thursday. I mean, pretty straightforward, not an unreasonable demand. Times Picayune Advocate reported there were 412 city employees making less than $15 an hour, not including workers at the Sewage and Water Board. The Lens was not able to independently verify that number with the Civil Service Department, rather, on Thursday afternoon. While the council didn't raise city worker wages on its own, it did take some action to try and pave the way. At Thursday's meeting, the council passed a motion requesting that the city chief administrative officer, Gilbert Montano, provide the council with an analysis in the next 45 days of what it would take to increase the minimum wage for direct city employees to $15 an hour. I mean, so like they're saying that's paving the way, and yes, it is. However, it's like it's doing something without doing something, if you know what I mean. Like it's basically an official way of saying we'll look into it. You know, it's not sufficient in any meaningful way. I've seen that happen a million times where they'll say like they'll start like a exploratory whatever to like look into this thing and then just drop it. So pressure's got to stay on. Solidarity with all the city workers that are showing up and advocating for themselves. Really, that's really important right now. Joe Giarrusso added amendment to the motion to require the CAO analysis to include, quote, whether departments benefit by increasing staffing to rely less on contractors or whether using more contractor labor is beneficial. That's a little bit scary, actually. I mean, like, I guess it could go either way depending on, like, what the commission is. But if the commission decides actually it's better to have contractors, that means there's less direct city workers, which means they will qualify for the $15 minimum wage. However, like, I don't know. I prefer to have more people directly working for the city. In either situation, I'd rather people be making more money. This is just bringing up a question that is like a solution in search of an answer, right? The way things work, you're surprised they don't give themselves a raise at the same time. I mean, it's the city council, man. It's the city council. Gary Brosset also announced on Thursday that he plans to introduce another ordinance to direct the city service department, a city department that works with the commission, civil service department rather, to complete a pay study and provide recommendations to civil service commissioners on how to raise the minimum wage for city workers to $15 an hour. If the Civil Service Commission does raise the minimum wage, it likely won't be as simple as just raising the wage of people making under $15 an hour. The commission may also have to increase pay for workers who currently make more than $15 an hour, but hold more senior positions than the workers being brought up to the $15 minimum. Well, and that just makes sense, though, right? If people already make more than $15 an hour, or they already make $15 an hour and everybody else just gets a pay raise and they don't, that's kind of not fair. I mean, like, the point is to get everybody more money, more so that they can survive, so that they can continue to just or can actually, get their shit together because they have the money that they need to survive. So like, that's not particularly unreasonable to want to get more people more money. Some public commenters were a bit frustrated with the calls for studies analysis when they say it is clear that pay below $15 an hour isn't sufficient to live in New Orleans. It's not. I mean, the city's expensive. What I have here is 5 studies since 2001, Mitchell said, all saying the same thing, that we are drastically underpaid for the job that we do, particularly in the place that they live. Grant Rodriguez, another firefighter, said that he was a New Orleans native, that his family lived here, and that he wanted to stay in the city, unlike other firefighters that have left for higher wages in other cities. But he said his current wage of $13.53, he wasn't making enough even after picking up a second job. Firefighters having to work a second job. Like, you fight fires in the morning or in the afternoon or in the evening, and you drive fucking Uber or Lyft or something. You go work at the fucking other store. You work at like Whole Foods or Walmart or whatever on the side because your job fighting fires is not paying you enough. I can't afford a house, so that sucks, he said. This is what I want to do with my life, and I can't do it here. So I'm going to have to go somewhere else. My God. It's like the city council wants the fires to win. The city's existing living wage ordinance for city contractors became effective in 2016. The rate was originally $10.55 an hour and rose to its current rate of $11.19 an hour due to a clause in the law that automatically increases the rate every year to match inflation. Ordinance passed on Thursday will increase the rate to $13.25 an hour starting in 2022 and $15 an hour starting in 2023. The wage will continue to climb even after that based on inflation. I mean, that's good. I mean, that's good for contractors. Like the fact that it's tied to inflation is good as well because the wage is going to continue to automatically rise. It doesn't have to be approved. But I mean, again, the fact that it applies to one group of people and not the other is an issue. It doesn't apply directly to city workers. And also, I mean, again, this is only city workers we're talking about. Minimum wage in New Orleans is still $7.25 an hour. It's half of that, half of the $15 minimum wage that doesn't come in for contractors until 2023. Like this is just so many different floors of like where people's bottom wage can be. The living wage applies to workers of employers who hold city contracts worth more than $25,000. So smaller contracts means that does not apply to you, as well as their subcontractors. The ordinance also covers employers that receive more than $100,000 of financial assistance, including grants, debt forgiveness, and tax subsidies in a 12-month period. So there's some loopholes there. That means loopholes. So if you get $25,000, if you have a contract of more than $25,000, it applies to you. But if you have a $24,999, $1,000 contract, it doesn't. If you don't receive $100,000 of financial assistance, it doesn't apply to you. Law stipulates that companies only have to pay their employees a living wage for the hours spent working on a project attached to the city contract or financial assistance. If an employee can't differentiate between employees working on a city contract versus those that aren't, then all its employees are covered by the living wage ordinance for the duration of the contract. Like, there's so many like rules and like it's so convoluted. Like, just $15 an hour across the board, please. Like, that's crazy. Raising the wage for direct city employees, meanwhile, will require action from the Civil Service Commission. The Service Commission is supposed to shield city employment decisions from political influence. Oh, God. It's a parliamentarian, man. Out of the 5 commissioners, 1 is nominated through an employee election and confirmed by the city council. The other 4 are nominated by the presidents or chancellors of local universities and confirmed by the council. But so it's like a body of professionals, I guess. Although the body is supposed to be non-political, multiple mayors have faced scrutiny for alleged interference with the commission. No shit. In 2014, the lens reported on former Commissioner Kevin Wilde's apparently close relationship with the officials of then Mayor Mitch Landrieu's administration. Wildes, who served as commissioner's chair, was a key figure in the passage of a sweeping Landrieu-backed civil service overhaul. Last year, the lens reported that on Cantrell's quiet and successful campaign to replace former commission chair Michelle Craig, citing concerns that there was an overrepresentation of union interests on the commission. Wow, good job, Mayor. Good job getting rid of that over-representation of union interest problem. That seems like a really important problem that you needed to solve. And the city council ended up approving Craig's replacement, an apparent violation of the city's open meetings law. So they not only did they do a union busting. I guess it wouldn't technically be like a union busting, but like a union like just wiping them out from. You know what? It is. It's like like if you have this thing, but did it behind closed doors and illegally, which is classic. That's what happens. That's always what happens. Cantrell's administration also filed a complaint last year against the employee-nominated commissioner, currently firefighter Clifton Moore, with the State Board of Ethics last year over his refusal to recuse himself in a vote over emergency pay for public safety personnel during the coronavirus pandemic. The city argued that the State Board of Ethics that it was in conflict of interest for Clifton to vote on any issue that impacted him financially as a city employee. Okay, so what she's doing is anytime anybody doesn't do what the mayor says, she'll just find a way to get rid of them. And that's literally the point of these kinds of bodies is supposed to be that they're insulated from political pressure. And the mayor, not just Cantrell, but Landrieu before her and every mayor before that too, uses political pressure to get those people eliminated. The appearance of these bodies as non-political is literally just for show. That's just for show. It's smoke and mirrors. Ultimately, it would be important to get the Cantrell administration on board in order to increase the minimum wage for city employees. Quote, "We must act," Brosset said. "The administration must act. Civil service must act." And the problem here is that, again, the mayor, this is election time for the mayor, and nobody's running against her. So there's no reason for her not to pull this kind of bullshit.
The person under the conservative challenging the.
Oh gosh. So how we doing, chat? How we doing today? It's Friday. That's how we're starting our Friday fun day. A little angry posting here. Yeah. Oh God. Oh God. Okay. So a lot of people are sort of talking, and again, I brought this up yesterday. We talked about this a little bit with Blanca. And I do find this whole thing interesting. Some people might think that this is sort of I don't know, not particularly important. I kind of I'm not really worried about that. But I'm kind of obsessed with the Britney Spears thing right now. Mostly because again, it's somebody who basically has no control of her life and has sort of been put into a conservatorship based off of her her behavior from over a decade ago. It's indicative that the way that people, even huge celebrities, get public representation by court appointed judges and stuff like that. Those lawyers and things like that are very unprepared, even for celebrities, to defend their clients and things like that. So if that's what applies to, yes, Jacob says free Britney in Palestine. Holy shit, you get a whole week off? That rules, Jacob. But yeah, just if this can happen to a giant celebrity, this can definitely happen to normal people. And I wanted to watch this Legal Eagle video, and we'll sort of react along to it. I want to hear your thoughts in chat. I'm interested in what you're doing for your vacation, though. Gary and Jacob, I'm actually gonna be heading out somewhere after next week. I'm gonna be going to a cabin out in North Carolina, driving up there. But yeah, hashtag free Britney in Palestine. I love that. That fucking rules. But yeah, let's take a look at here.
Conservatorship that has dominated every aspect of her life since 2008. But why? Well,
Ruidoso, New Mexico. Cool.
Reportedly, the conservator, that is the guy in charge of her life, was making $10,000 a week while she was only given an allowance of $2,000. She was forced to get an IUD so that she couldn't have another child, and she was appointed a lawyer.
That's the thing that's crazy to me. Like, the fact that she has so little control, like, over her, like, entire situation that she can't eat. Like, she's forced. They literally forced an IUD, like, legally forced, not, like, physically forced. But, like, forced her to have an IUD in her body so that she cannot have children. That's bananas. Surfer Girl Gritty is also on board with Free Britney. Hell yeah, this is a Free Britney show. It's really crazy. It's so crazy. Like, I've never seen anything like this before. And you know, somebody brought up like this could have been something that happened with like Kanye or something like that. Because he's expressed like kind of like unstable behavior in the past. I don't see that as possible. I think this is like a lot of this is based in like, oh, you know, woman cannot self-advocate for self. Woman must have babysitter or whatever, you know, daddy must take control of situation. Grug. That's sort of like, I mean, that's what I mean, I might be wrong on that, but that's my sort of read.
Who never told her that she could challenge the conservatorship, and that is just the tip of the iceberg.
I shouldn't be in a conservatorship if I can work and provide money and work for myself and pay other people.
Britney testified in a probate hearing for the first time in over a decade, and she tells a story about being forced to perform against her will.
He handed me a sheet of paper as I got off the stage in Vegas and said I had to sign it. It was very threatening and scary, and with the conservatorship, I couldn't even get my own attorney, so out of fear, I went ahead and I did the tour.
And despite the conservatorship during the preparations for this tour, she took responsibility for rehearsing and directing her own dancers.
I wasn't good. I was great. I led a room of 16 new dancers in rehearsals. It's funny to hear my manager's side of the story. They all said I wasn't participating in rehearsals and I never agreed to take my medication. Ma'am, I'm not here to be anyone's slave. I can say no to a dance move.
She also said her conservatorship, which has...
I've actually looked through a lot of her statement too. Like, she came through like pretty competent, and like the question of her ability to take care of herself while like managing, like she released like 2 albums and went on multiple tours throughout this time. The fact that she's was not like the idea that she's not like competent enough to manage her own life in addition to that is kind of ridiculous, right?
Has mostly been directed by her father, Jamie Spears, refuses to allow her to marry and have children.
I want to be able to get married and have a baby. I was told right now in the conservatorship, I'm not able to get married or have a baby. I have a ID inside of myself right now, so I don't get pregnant. I wanted to take the ID out so I could start trying to have another baby, but this so-called team won't let me go to the doctor to take it out because they don't want me to have children.
The things Britney said about her conservatorship are harrowing and include allegations of abuse. And there are, of course, circumstances when a court-appointed conservator is given the right to assume responsibility for someone else's life decisions, and that makes sense. Although Britney's conservatorship was originally based on her own mental health crisis, one would assume it takes more than that to maintain a legal conservatorship for more than a decade over a seemingly functional adult. But we don't have to look very hard to find people who have repeatedly repeatedly filed for bankruptcy, or have had very public mental health crises, or have had a serious drug habit and caused their life to spiral
why
out of
didn't
control.
Charlie Sheen get a conservative? I mean, like, I'm not like advocating for more of this applied to like more people, but like if you're holding up the same standard for everybody, why aren't like multiple people getting like the same kind of treatment? Because celebs always be acting up, like it's just all the time. Like and like I don't know, like this is just like it's kind of silly, but yeah. What's the deal? Why is this the only time this is happening?
Had very public mental health crises, or have had a serious drug habit and caused their life to spiral out of control, and even those who were being manipulated and conned out of their money. But none of these people have been subjected to a conservatorship, the kind that Britney Spears has been under for a decade. So what does it take for a court to put a person under a general conservatorship? And why does Britney Spears want to end this conservatorship in her case? Well, today I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about what is happening to Britney Spears. Hey, Legal Eagles, it's time to think like a guardian ad litem, because Britney Spears has been under a conservatorship for over a decade. So what is a conservatorship? Well, a conservatorship is a court-appointed arrangement in which a person or organization is chosen to protect and manage the finances and at times the personal care of someone whom a judge has found to be unable to manage their own affairs. A conservator is responsible for using their judgment to arrange for the care and protection of the person under the conservatorship. The person under the conservatorship is known as the conservatee. Now, there are a few different kinds of conservatorships under California law. Britney Spears has been under a general conservatorship since 2008.
And like my understanding about these things, which is like tenuous at best, so like, you know, take this with a grain of salt, but the idea of conservatorships is supposed to be to like so that people who like literally mostly older people, you know, people who essentially need to have you know, their lives managed in many like very like concrete and very real ways, that's like an actual legitimate application of something like a conservatorship. But like the idea and perhaps, you know, having something like perhaps this is something that needed to happen to somebody like Britney Spears. I mean, probably not, but like let's just grant, like, let's just put this aside for now. Let's just say that it was like legitimate for a period of time, that, you know, she did have a crisis of mental health or whatever. Um, Getting out of that is really like the difficult part, right? There's no, because in previous situation, or in the most general situations, when it comes to the end of somebody's life, when they sort of lose their ability to function and take care of themselves, like there does not have to be a bringing people back in an end to this conservatorship, right? But in Britney's case, she was 20 something years old, maybe 30. Like if she can get her things, you know, sorted out, and if the crisis that she's having ends, there has to be a way for her to actually be able to have control of her life once again, right?
This is governed by the California Probate Court. There are conservatorships of adults who cannot handle their finances, personal care, or both. This consists of two parts: conservatorships of the estate and conservatorships of a person. A conservator of the estate is appointed to administer the person's financial life, such as investing the person's money, protecting their assets, paying their bills, and budgeting for expenses. A conservator of the person takes charge of the person's non-financial life. Now, the specifics differ depending on each person's circumstances, but generally a conservator can decide where the person will live, whether they receive an allowance, and whether they can make their own personal care and health decisions. General conservatorships have no termination date. They can and usually do last until the end of the person's life. But at the same time, the vast majority of these conservatorships involve the elderly or the infirm, people that manifestly cannot take care of themselves. So it's not something that lasts 50 years. It might be something that lasts 5 years until they pass away. But let's talk about the scope of conservatorships, because once a conservatorship is established, the limitations on a conservatee's freedom are incredibly broad. As disability rights lawyer Patricia Cavey points out,
the interesting question that he brings up, because like when he talks about a general conservatorship to the person, And I like Legal Eagle. I don't always sort of like agree with where he comes down on things, but I think he's really good at explaining at least the specifics of situations. Call me a lib or whatever. But the thing that I like about that, the way he laid it out is like it's not supposed to be 50 years, but like the way that the things are like aligned, or the way that the rules are sort of like laid out, is that in order to end the conservatorship, like the burden is on the person who is under it to the person who is under that conservatorship, the burden of proving whether or not that is legitimate is on that person, not the person who is holding that conservatorship. They're just assumed to have been correct on the front end. Jacob, you worked in a law firm in Alabama, and that was your experience with conservatorship. You only saw elderly folks with dementia or something in them. Yeah, I mean, they literally can't take care of themselves, and those things end with most of the time with the end of that person's life, like Legal said just a moment ago. But like the fact that like they don't have some kind of like time limit, even if it's arbitrary, to essentially like extend these things if they go a certain amount of time, the burden again is on right now. The burden is on the person who is the conservatorship is being held over to prove that they're not, that they're capable of taking care of themselves, which is a lot harder to do. It gives a huge advantage to the person holding that conservatorship. A hard word to say, by the way. But that's, I mean, I'm interested in more information if you have it on that, Jacob.
Quote, in many ways, the deprivation of liberty through an involuntary guardianship order is greater than that suffered by a convicted felon.
Jesus.
Prisoners retain basic rights to control medical decisions, bodily integrity, and the right to conduct their business affairs and retain their estate. Wards do not. The due process protections of the 14th Amendment apply to guardianships and conservatorships, but due process only guarantees the right to notice and a court hearing. The Supreme Court has never decided a case establishing the precise parameters of due process in the context of guardianships or conservatorship. This means that there is no universal requirement that people who are subject to conservatorship proceedings have specific rights, like a Sixth Amendment right to an attorney. Most states require or allow the appointment of a lawyer, but they don't necessarily let the conservatee choose their own lawyer. Once a conservatorship is established, the costs of administering the person's life are paid by the conservatee, the person who is under
That's
the
cool, man. But thank you for that insight. I appreciate it.
care of these other people. This doesn't automatically mean that there's a conflict of interest, but it's something that Brittany flagged when she spoke in court. The fact that her family lives off of her fortune and her performances provide a living for many people creates a conflict of interest.
It's been a long time since I've owned my money, and it's my wish and my dream for all of this to end without being tested. Again, it makes no sense whatsoever for the state of California to sit back and literally watch me with their own two eyes make a living for so many people and pay so many people trucks and buses on tour on the road with me and be told I'm not good enough, but I'm great at what I do.
So that brings us to the very obvious question of who is able to initiate a conservatorship over another adult? Well, any person who wants to be a conservator can file a petition for conservatorship. This could be a spouse, a relative, a friend, or even a manager. And under the law, the court gives preference to certain people: a spouse, adult children, parent, sibling, or another person. And in Spears' case, her father, Jamie Spears, filed a petition for temporary conservatorship in 2008. This was later converted to a general conservatorship, and he sought and received the right to manage the estate and her person. Attorney Andrew Wallet was later named co-conservator. And now, why was
ironic that the guy's name was Andrew Wallet?
Brittany's father appointed as a conservator? Well, because she was not married at the time, there was no one else higher on the priority list. And it's possible for the same person to become conservator of both the estate and the person. To be appointed as both, separate petitions have to be filed. So what is the legal standard to force another adult person into a conservatorship? Well, California Probate Code Section 1821 requires the initial petition to show the following. Number one, the inability of the proposed conservatee to properly provide for his or her needs for physical health, food, clothing, and shelter. Two, the location of the proposed conservatee's residence and the ability of the proposed conservatee to live in the residence while under conservatorship. Three, alternatives to conservatorship considered by the petitioner or proposed conservator and reasons why those alternatives are not available. Number four, health and social services provided to the proposed conservatee during the year preceding the filing of the petition. And number five, the inability of the proposed conservatee to substantially manage his or her own financial resources or to resist fraud or undue influence. This is, and frankly should be, a very high bar for the petitioner to clear. The facts need to show that the person is not capable of taking care of themselves or of managing their own finances, or that they are...
I missed it. Maybe somebody help me out. Did each of those things have to be met, or like one of them, or like two of them? Because like, if it's all four, then I mean that's a necessarily high bar. If it's any one of them, I mean, you can juke some numbers.
And frankly should be, a very high bar for the petitioner to clear. The facts need to show that the person is not capable of taking care of themselves or of managing their own finances, or that they are susceptible to manipulation. Now, in the case of Britney Spears, we don't know exactly what the facts were that the court relied on when it determined that Britney needed a conservatorship back in 2008. When Jamie Spears petitioned the probate court, Britney had been through enormous upheaval in a very short period of time. Britney was harassed repeatedly by the paparazzi. She publicly shaved her head shortly after the death of a beloved aunt. And this event was captured by cameras and became an enormous tabloid story. She was also in a divorce and in a custody battle with Kevin Federline. She had voluntarily gone to rehab and done 2 stints in a psychiatric institution. We assume that she has a disability, but we don't know whether she has any psychiatric diagnosis. Now, Jamie Spears also told the court that Britney's new manager, Sam Lufty, was abusing her. And the court in these proceedings entered a restraining order against Lufty. Now, while we don't have all of this information, I don't think anyone seriously questioned the necessity of the Spears conservatorship at the time. However, in retrospect, it's fair to ask whether the Spears family could have used a less restrictive measure to protect Britney, or whether this conservatorship has gone on for way too long. Now, what are some less restrictive measures that could have been instituted? Well, for starters, a power of attorney, where a person legally authorizes an individual to make financial decisions for them. This could be a spouse, a friend, a manager,
sounds like
or even
fairly like normal. Like power of attorney is like one of the things that you hear about, like, you know, also like I mean, again, you know, I basically prior to this situation have never heard of a conservatorship, but I had heard like a lot about like power of attorney and like people's ability to make decisions for other people legally, but like I'd never seen like the degree by which you can sort of control someone else's life by court order. Like that's crazy to me.
a lawyer. A person might also agree to give temporary custody to their children to their ex. Giving someone power of attorney allows them to make decisions on your behalf, but it doesn't allow them to control your every waking moment. There can be mediations in court-ordered rehab when drugs are an issue, and someone who has power of attorney can create a trust and pay the bills of their client and put them on an allowance. All of these are serious steps, but they don't compare to the severity of a conservatorship. But of course, sometimes conservatorship is necessary. Now, you might ask, aren't there some legal safeguards to make sure that the conservatorship is necessary on a continual basis? Well, there are supposed to be safeguards in these arrangements. The conservator has to periodically report to the court about the status of the situation. In some circumstances, the conservator will need court's approval to make certain decisions. And in the beginning of this process, a court-appointed investigator is responsible for interviewing the potential conservatee, explaining their rights, and making recommendations to the judge. However, after the conservatorship is established, the investigator only speaks to the conservatee every 2 years. And here, Jamie Spears maintained full control over Britney even after Sam Lufty was gone, her divorce and custody arrangements were final, and her drug use had apparently ended. Public reports show that Jamie, quote, had the authority to restrict and limit her visitors, oversee her personal security, and dictate her medical and psychiatric treatment. Jamie has repeatedly said that he only wants what's in her best interest and that he loves his daughter and wouldn't force her to do anything that she wouldn't want to do. But of course, the Free Britney movement has pointed out cracks in this facade for years. When Britney had a successful run of shows in Las Vegas, people started to question why a highly skilled performer was still under a conservatorship. Then things started to unravel publicly in 2019. In January, Jamie's original co-conservator, Andrew Wallet, resigned after asking for a raise. That left Jamie Spears as the sole conservator of both Spears' person and estate. The New York Times recently reviewed a transcript of a hearing from the spring of 2019 when Britney's lawyer, quote, asserted that she had been forced into mental health facilities against her will on exaggerated grounds, which she viewed as punishment for standing up for herself and making an objection during a rehearsal. At the time, Britney's lawyer filed a document saying that Britney was afraid of her father. And later in 2019, Kevin Federline backed up this claim.
This is a fucking, I mean, like, she's an adult. Like, this, the weirdest thing about all this is that, like, she's a grown ass woman. Like, literally, like, she was in the, 90s and 2000s, like, at the top of, like, the pop, music, industry, fucking all of that stuff, making millions of dollars. And, like, she's legitimately afraid of her father. Like, that is, it's not, I'm not blaming her for this. Like, she's got very good grounds by which to be afraid of him, because he held basically, like, legal control over, like, even very basic things about her. But, like, that is really, really fucking sad that she's like that she feels that way. That she doesn't have, like, it's wild to me. Wild that somebody's put in that position. That anybody is put into that position. Not just like a huge pop star. Not only huge pop stars should be, like, not afraid of their father. It should be nobody. She should get a review every year at minimum. I mean, it sounds to me like they just got to drop the whole fucking thing.
And making an objection during a rehearsal. At the time, Britney's lawyer filed a document saying that Britney was afraid of her father. And later in 2019, Kevin Federline backed up this claim. He helped their teen sons file for a restraining order against Jamie because of something he did to one of their children when they visited with Jamie. And Federline's attorney said, quote, Britney exercised appropriate parental conduct, removing her children from a dangerous situation. True. This order was granted without opposition from Jamie and barred him from contact with the boys for 3 years. In September of 2019, Jamie Spears asked to be released from managing Britney's personal care. The court appointed Jody Montgomery a professional conservator. Jamie continues in his role as manager of the estate, and he has told the court that he opposes ending his conservatorship. The court allowed Jamie to take a 1.5% cut of everything Britney makes from her performances. This is in addition to his monthly salary of $16,000 for acting as conservator, and doesn't include Jamie's attorney's fees, which are also paid out of Britney's estate. Britney said, quote, they've done a good job.
Her own money, like, the money that she's supported, like, again, in the rules that we have, the money that she has is being used to, like, keep her locked up like this, like, or at least out of control of her own fucking situation.
At exploiting my life, talking about her father and Montgomery in June of 2021 when she addressed the court for the first time. So what about the lawyer? Well, Britney has a court-appointed lawyer, Samuel D. Ingram III. Under California Probate Code Section 1470 and 1471, judges are required to appoint counsel for the proposed conservatee in some situations. Most court clerks have a rotating list of lawyers who serve as court-appointed counsel. Now, in practice, this means that the person isn't picking their own lawyer. Now, how can this be? Well, the basis for conservatorship is literally that the person isn't competent to enter into contracts. So Jamie Spears has repeatedly emphasized his belief that his daughter is not capable of handling her own business without being taken advantage of by other people. And since this is the very foundation of the conservatorship, a judge can also presume that the person isn't competent to hire their own lawyer. And Ingram told the court in 2020 that Britney wanted her father replaced by Bessemer Trust as co-conservator. The Bessemer Trust is a bank. Now, Ingram told the court that Britney was actually afraid of her father and that in the future he might file a petition to end the conservatorship. But despite Britney's apparent discomfort with the conservatorship, Ingram never filed a petition to end it. And according to news reports, Ingram told the court that Britney wanted a chance to speak, but he had no idea what she would say. During the court hearing, Britney said that he never told her she had a right to file a petition to end the conservatorship.
I was told
you literally can't get a better lawyer the guy that they appointed to her, because according to the logic of conservatorships, she's not capable of making that decision. Like, she just assumed incompetent. She's assumed wrong in every situation.
I have to sit down and be evaluated again if I want to end the conservatorship. Ma'am, I didn't know I could petition the conservatorship to end it. I'm sorry for my ignorance, but I honestly didn't know that. I don't feel like I should even be in a room with anyone to offend me by trying to question my capacity of intelligence, whether I need to be in this stupid conservatorship or not.
If this is true, this could be a serious ethical lapse, because just because the lawyer is appointed doesn't mean that they don't have all of the same ethical obligations to any client to zealously represent that client to the best of their abilities and in the best interests of their client. And there are other holes in the record regarding Ingram as well. Probate law allows the court to set the lawyer's fee and to bill it to the conservatee's estate. And Ingram right now is making $10,000 a week in fees as her lawyer. Yet neither he nor the court could produce the order which established his rate or allowed
$10K a week. And yeah, he didn't want that shit to end. Like, wait, you can't wait. I'm not going to tell if you can challenge this. I'm making $10K a week.
him to bill that much. It's possible that he was making $10,000 a week since 2008. All the while, there are reports that Brittany was given an allowance of only $2,000 a week. All the while, her estate is worth north of $60 million. However, at the same time, Brittany says she also has developed a good relationship with Ingram.
Actually, I know I've had grown with a personal relationship with Sam, my lawyer. I've been talking to him like 3 times a week now. We've kind of built a relationship, but I haven't really had the opportunity by my own self to actually handpick my own lawyer by myself. And I would like to be able to do that.
It's theoretically possible based on the size of the estate that these fees are warranted. It's possible based on the amount of work that he is doing that these fees are warranted. But we just don't happen to know. The situation with Ingram just isn't clear. But it certainly seems suspicious on its face. And what we're witnessing here may be true confusion by Brittany and Ingram about the lawyer's role. The nature of the conservatorship can often blur the ethical lines between advocate and guardian. California law requires lawyers to maintain confidentiality and loyalty to their clients, and there's no exception for lawyers appointed to represent conservatees. And in fact, California rejected the proposed rule of professional conduct, which would have given lawyers some freedom to give their own opinion about their clients with diminished capacity. For example, San Diego lawyers Ann Rudolph and Ralph Hughes argued that the nature of conservatorship encourages lawyers to actually report on their clients to the court, explaining what they feel is in the best interest of their client, rather than advocating for what their clients actually want. They say that this violates the lawyer's ethical duty to keep attorney-client communications confidential. And in their view, this violates the lawyer's ethical duty to zealously advocate for their client. A lawyer, quote, cannot tell the court what the client has said without the client's consent, cannot ignore the client's stated desires and goals, and cannot advocate something that the client does not want. So, for example, this could lead a lawyer to using the best interest standard to make decisions about the client's...
But if there's confidentiality, how can you tell?
About the client's mental capacity.
If there's confidentiality, how can you tell that this is what the client wants? Like, it's supposed to be like an ethical guideline, and like essentially if the client doesn't speak up, which it sounds like Brittany might do if that was the case, but if they don't, let's assume that they don't, then the lawyer can basically do whatever the fuck they want. Wow.
So, for example, this could lead a lawyer to using the best interest standard to make decisions about the client's mental capacity, decisions that arguably the lawyer isn't qualified to make. And in other words, a court-appointed lawyer should be an advocate for what the client wants, not act as a guardian ad litem who substitutes their own judgment for the client's wishes. And it's also important to recognize that despite the "we're here to help" attitude, conservatorships are inherently adversarial. They strip people of their most fundamental rights. Now, most lawyers would say that the nature of this process requires lawyers to be zealous advocates, but in California, there are court decisions allowing lawyers to exercise their independent judgment on crucial matters impacting their conservatee, including whether to withdraw life support. In cases permitting lawyers to decide to pull the plug, an appeals court has emphasized that there isn't a law requiring a court to get involved in a conservator's decision to literally withdraw the right to creation, sterilization, and abortion. Yet coerced sterilization in the U.S. has a long and horrible legal history. In 1927, Oliver Wendell Holmes, one of the most respected jurists of all time, wrote one of the most shocking Supreme Court opinions ever in Buck versus Bell, which upheld Virginia's Eugenical Sterilization Act. This law allowed the state to forcibly sterilize Carrie Buck, a poor woman that the state had said should not be able to have children.
Cool.
The opinion
Oliver
is
Wendell Holmes. Dope. Just like court-approved sterilization. You know, I don't want. Why don't libertarians get pissed off about this shit? You know, why don't libertarians get pissed off about this instead of like taxes?
A poor woman that the state had said should not be able to have children. The opinion is infamous because Holmes wrote, 3 generations of imbeciles is enough. Carrie Buck actually didn't have any discernible disability, but her foster family initiated a court proceeding against her after their nephew sexually assaulted her. The case is a lesson on how easy it could be to convince a court to take away a person's freedom. It's also
70,000 forced sterilizations based off of that one decision by the court. So this poor young woman, really nothing wrong with her physically or mentally, a victim of, a terrible sexual assault, and there's little hearing to declare feeble-minded. She gets sent off to a colony for epileptics and feeble-minded, where it happens her mother, who probably was not feeble-minded, was already an inmate. What? I mean, no. I mean, they know what they're doing. Like, libertarians know what they're fucking doing. They don't actually give a shit about they don't actually give a shit about like people's liberties and rights. They just don't want the government to bother them. That's the key thing about libertarians to always remember, is that they don't want the government to bother them or any of the shit that they can do. Now, if you're poor, tough shit.
Assaulted her. The case is a lesson on how easy it could be to convince a court to take away a person's freedom. It's also a lesson in
like libertarianism, basically like the primary like post hoc like after the fact justification for the way that things are, and like all of that shit, all of like the actual workings of the world are just hand waved away. They don't exist or assumed legitimate. The only things that they don't like are taxes and like the government. Like, this is the only kinds of things in their eyes that the government can do. Like the only thing the government can do is like oppress people.
Even respected jurists on the Supreme Court get things horribly, horribly wrong. And after Buck versus Bell, America sterilized about 70,000 people. And in this case, Brittany told the court,
I wanted to take the ID out so I could start trying to have another baby, but this so-called team won't let me go to the doctor to take it out because they don't want me to have children.
This means that at some point she got an IUD that prevents pregnancy.
I mean, that is forced sterilization, be it temporarily or not. Like, she's basically put in a very similar position to the 70,000 women that were like knock-on effects of that one fucking Supreme Court decision from the, early 20th century. She's, quote unquote, feeble-minded or whatever.
But this so-called team won't let me go to the doctor to take it out because they don't want me to have children.
This means that at some point she got an IUD that prevents pregnancy, but when she decided that she'd like to have another child, her conservatorship, run by her father, refused to allow her to see a doctor about taking it out. We don't know whether there was ever a hearing regarding Brittany's IUD, but the rules of conservatorship do not expressly require one, even though it obviously impacts a fundamental right. Just as no California statute or decision purports to require judicial approval of a conservator's decision to forego further medical treatment, there's no statute requiring judicial approval of a conservator's decision to limit a conservative's reproductive choices. The conservatorship is broad and powerful. Since medical decisions are part of the conservatorship of the person, Brittany has no final say over her own medical treatment, including whether she uses birth control. And this court has delegated power to conservators, so it takes a hands-off role unless there is a petition to terminate the conservatorship. So let's talk about whether it's possible to end a conservatorship and whether it should be ended. One of the reasons that the Spears conservatorship started to get attention was because Britney's activities seemed to undermine Jamie's assertions that she needed it in the first place. And let's just look at what Britney has done over the last 13 years. She's released 4 albums, served as a judge on a reality show, and performed
not 2 albums, 4 albums.
Hundreds of shows during a Las Vegas residency. Judging by her work, Britney is in a very different place than she was in 2008. Why is a woman who is not yet 40 with a full-time and very demanding job who shares custody of 2 children still under a conservatorship? Remember, this isn't about being bad with money or using drugs or refusing to go to therapy or anything else that a lot of other Americans may struggle with. For the conservatorship to be necessary, the person must still be unable to manage their affairs, full stop. The legal standard remains that a person is unable to provide for their basic needs like food, clothing, shelter, and be incapable of making medical decisions. For financial decisions, the requirement is a person being unable to manage their financial affairs or resist undue influence. But here's the problem. The burden isn't on the conservator to establish the continuing need for conservatorship. The burden is instead on the conservatee to prove that they don't need it. And although it may seem pretty simple to make this showing,
that's what I kind of brought up a little bit earlier, that like the burden of proof is on the person that is already being controlled by this situation. So you have to prove that you don't need a conservatorship and petition for it to be pulled away for it to end. And you're assumed, like, the burden is on the person who is already sort of like considered to be like feeble-minded or whatever. Like that word just keeps coming up in my mind. It sticks in my brain, like looking at that fucking like that Holmes decision. You know, that means that you have a huge advantage if you hold this conservatorship over someone.
The burden is instead on the conservatee to prove that they don't need it. And although it may seem pretty simple to make this showing, I'm not sure how easy it is. Now, if you aren't capable of cooking for yourself and want to avoid getting put in a conservatorship, you've got to try HelloFresh.
All right. Try.
HelloFresh. I'm a pretty good cook.
Nice try. All right. Is that it? Is that the whole thing? Nice job. Nice job slipping to the ad. You thought you could get one by the goalie. Yeah. But yeah, that's like that's really wild. And I think that he made a really good case for, essentially a pretty good case for, well, he laid out the situation, but when he does that, he lays them out in a pretty like straightforward terms, and I like that about the Legal Eagle guy. Well, you can't block a sponsor. You just need to be on your pause game. But like, I think that he does a good job of pointing out where the flaws in the system is. He does provide at least like a liberal critique of the court systems and the legal system that we have in the United States. So I think that like that's a pretty decent channel. You should give Legal Eagle a follow on YouTube. There's a plugin to bypass like ads, like not like integrated ads. Oh, I gotta see about that. I gotta see about that. I didn't know about that. I didn't know that was differentiated from any other part of ad. Well, it's not that big a deal, but like if you find a thing, let me know. But anyway, yeah, that was really interesting, I thought. Oh wow, new second thought 10 minutes ago. Should we watch it? Why are so many people losing faith in capitalism? Oh. Let's take a look.
This episode and others like it are made possible by the generous support of my patrons on Patreon. If you'd like to help support my channel and get early access to every video, consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/secondthought. Apple pie, baseball, combination KFC Taco Bell, miles of identical strip malls off every highway, Few things are more
Stuff that makes America great, baby.
quintessentially American than these pillars.
Combination Pizza Hut, Taco Bell. Combination Baskin Robbins and Dunkin' Donuts, baby. You don't got to go to two places to get your coffee and your ice cream and your donuts.
Of Western culture.
What if you put the coffee? I'm sorry. What if you put the ice cream in the middle of the donut? You ever think of that one?
Sure. But there's one more feature of American life that most people, until recently, would tell you is just as American as apple pie: capitalism.
Yes.
While it may seem strange that an economic system has become such an integral part of millions of American personalities, if you look at this country's long history of pro-capitalist propaganda and anti-communist rhetoric, it becomes pretty clear why so many people are violently defensive of a system that no longer benefits the average person. But if recent trends continue, we'll soon see a radically different, more modern United States in the coming years. In this episode, we're going to talk about recent polling that shows a decline in favorability of capitalism and a surge towards socialism. Now, before we get into the good stuff, I think it's important for me to offer a little disclaimer. For those who are new to the channel, I present commentary on current events, culture, and politics from a socialist perspective. Socialist does not mean liberal. Liberals still want to operate within the capitalist framework. But socialists, as the label suggests, advocate for socialism, an entirely different economic system. I present my content at a 101 level, so if you're confused about a certain topic and the socialist perspective on it, I recommend checking out some of my other videos. I also have a website with a bunch of book, podcast, and YouTube channel recommendations where you can learn more. It's also important to note that I try not to be antagonistic towards normal people who just have a different opinion, or who don't have the time or inclination to educate themselves about the failures of capitalism. I'll be snarky from time to time, but if you ever feel attacked, please be aware that that is not my intention. I think people communicate best when everyone is actively trying to understand where others are coming from. If you are inclined to support capitalism, try to have an open mind and ask questions in the comments. There are plenty of helpful people who will gladly engage in good faith discussion. With that out of the way, let's talk about why so many people are beginning to sour on capitalism in favor of socialism. Over the last few years, most notably since about 2016, there has been a significant resurgence of interest in socialism among younger Americans.
You know, I find this question of the question of socialism, like the idea of it being more popular, to be very interesting, because I think that it's possible, or it's possible that it's being overstated, and I don't want, like, the only reason I'm sort of like I like lean into that sort of possibility, not necessarily that it's the reality, but I want there to be confidence in, like, people who want to change the system that currently exists and overthrow capitalism, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But, like, I also want to sort of temper, like material expectations, not from the perspective of, like, I want to, like, I want to, like, stop this thing from happening. Quite the opposite. I just don't want there to be, like, unclear sort of a material assessment of the situation, so that results in bad decisions being made. So, like, while I do notice and agree that there's an uptick in, like socialist organizing and activity, I do sort of, like, want to be very, very clear and aware that, like, we're not a majority. We're not, like, in a position where we can, like, we're in a position where we can contest, like, individual, like, elections, and we can sort of, like, get influence in union, like, the labor movement to a certain extent, but there is a lot of work ahead of us in terms of, like, actual organizing, which, I mean, in fairness, also is, like, beyond, like, he literally just said, Second Thought just said this is a 101. So it's, like, laying out a lot of the basics here, but, like, I just want to make sure that, like this doesn't, like, lead to, like, overconfidence, and a sense of inevitability, because there's a lot of fucking work to do. Yeah, well, that's the other thing too. Like when that's just crazy though. The critical race theory and shit. Oh my god.
As scary as some news outlets have tried to
Boogeyman.
make
There you
this
go,
trend
just like when you
seem,
said.
socialism isn't new in America. 100 years ago, the US had a large and thriving socialist party. Unions were strong and represented workers effectively, protecting them from corporate overreach and exploitation. And we even had a candidate from the Socialist Party win 1 million votes in the 1920 presidential race. What's more impressive, he did it from a prison cell. Eugene Debs had been locked up for speaking out against the First World War, an act that was considered sedition at the time. The aspects of socialism that appealed to Americans back then were the same that appeal to them today. Socialists have always championed policies well ahead of their time. In the early 1900s, those policies included workplace safety laws, the 40-hour workweek, child labor laws, the 8-hour workday, and universal suffrage. These things were all unthinkable at the time. Fast forward to today, and not much has changed. Progressive, worker-oriented policies are still wildly popular, and it's only through massive corporate lobbying and extensive propaganda campaigns that the ruling class has been able to prevent such policies from becoming the norm. The US has been particularly successful in this regard. This country is now the only industrialized nation not to offer some form of universal healthcare. We have no federally mandated parental leave. Unions have been gutted. Benefits our parents and grandparents took for granted have been stripped away. Pensions are no longer offered, full-time benefits are essentially non-existent, paid sick days are incredibly rare, and most American workers don't even get major holidays off. In the face of this ever-worsening labor landscape, it's unsurprising that young people entering the job market are drawn to politicians like Bernie Sanders. Bernie campaigned as a democratic socialist, and that was most young Americans' first real experience with the ideology. That being said, if you take Bernie's platform and chart it among politicians from other nations, he'd fall squarely in the social democrat camp. Not actually socialist, but getting towards the furthest left reaches of capitalism. It can be kind of confusing for newbies to hear the terms social democrat and democratic socialist and understand the difference. Social democrats like Bernie or AOC advocate for heavy regulation on capitalism. They basically want to defang the exploitative capitalist system and establish more worker-friendly policies.
And the reason that they like stake out that position is not necessarily like what's in their hearts or whatever, but like that's the furthest reaches by which there's anything schemingly possible to do in sort of the electoral front. Like in terms of elections in the United States right now, probably the best that you could possibly do is social democracy, and like everywhere else like is the fight to change that landscape. People might disagree with me on that one, but that sort of like speaks to probably my sort of like pessimism about electoralism or like getting into elections, but like my sort of like which isn't to say that we shouldn't get like socialists and groups like DSA shouldn't get involved in elections. Quite the opposite. Like if nothing else, elections should be like a rearguard defensive action to ward off the worst possible outcomes. And at best, there's like there's possibilities to advance, at least in the short term. The brighter futures could be before us. Hope always springs eternal, but like there has to be a lot of moving of the football before that happens.
And they understand the importance of fighting climate change to mitigate the fallout. Socialists don't think
I'm talking about basically that's the best of possibilities for right now is what I'm trying to say. Until there can be a buildup of capacity, that's the best that we got.
Efficient. They want to dismantle capitalism entirely, as they believe its economic
which, by the way, is very possible, and it can happen very quickly.
Structure is built upon exploitation of both American workers and of workers in the global South, and is therefore inherently unreformable. As of right now, I wouldn't say there are any actual socialists in federal office. That's not to diminish the role people like Bernie have played in getting young people interested in left politics. But it's important to understand that when outlets
That's sort of a meaningless distinction, though. I will say that, like, oh, well, is this person like a real socialist? Is Bernie a real socialist or whatever? Like, who cares? Who cares?
like Fox and CNN try to cast run-of-the-mill social democratic politicians as some far-left communist threat, what they're really doing is trying to put a hard limit on what economic ideas are acceptable in the US. Okay, I think that's enough background. Let's talk about the newest bit of evidence for the leftward shift among American young people. According to a new poll by Axios, only half of younger Americans now hold a positive view of capitalism. This is a pretty significant change. Just 2 years ago, the margin was a massive 20 points.
You mean electoral, like engaging electoral fights? Yeah. Well, you have to stop them, right? You have to stop that. You have to stop the fucking I mean, right now in Louisiana, we talked about it yesterday. They have another one of those fucking horrible anti-trans bills that targets fucking children. You know, you have to have at least, people that are going to fight against that just for the basic protection of children, right? I mean, you can't leave a front in the class war undefended. You just can't. You can't do it.
With 58% of 18 to 34-year-olds reporting a positive opinion of capitalism, and 38% a negative opinion. Now, the numbers are much closer. Among the same age group, 49% view capitalism favorably, and 46% unfavorably. This shift has been driven in large part
You gotta play defense, right?
by Gen Z, those aged 18 to 24. This age group has just 42% positive opinion, and a striking 54% negative. Unsurprisingly, the 35 to 64 and 65 plus age groups have remained largely unchanged, with both groups reporting high favorability for capitalism. What is surprising is that young Republicans have actually trended away from capitalism as well. In 2019, 81% of Republicans and right-leaning people aged 18 to 34 had a positive view of capitalism. Today, that number has fallen to 66%. That's pretty shocking considering just how aggressively Republicans tend to defend capitalism. Interestingly, the shift towards socialism has been slower than the shift away from capitalism. If I had to guess, I would suspect that the decades of anti-communist propaganda that has been hammered into the American psyche since the Cold War is the main roadblock. And make no mistake, that propaganda continues to this day. Republicans and Democrats alike are united in opposing any leftward shift away from capitalism. It is their one truly bipartisan issue.
Well, I thank you for your question, but I have to say we're capitalist, and that's just the way it is.
So,
absolute cringe. Absolute fucking cringe. Well, hello, Kevin FM. That is absolute fucking cringe by Pelosi, because that person basically asked her about the growing popularity of socialism in America, and she's just like, shut the fuck up, sit down. It's crazy. You're basically telling young people and people who are excited to get involved with your stupid fucking pathetic party that never does anything, and except for whine about a parliamentarian saying you can't do anything, sit down and shut up. We're the adults here. It's crazy.
Can we take away from this trend of viewing capitalism less and less favorably? For starters,
it gets into, I talk about this quite a bit actually, the idea of capitalist realism. If you haven't read the book by Mark Fisher, Capitalist Realism, I actually highly recommend it. I don't want to be assigning all kinds of homework or whatever, I am a teacher. It is what I do, as Nathan Robinson once told me. But yeah, it is it does provide, maybe I should do an episode just on that, on the idea of capitalist realism. I've talked about it a lot on the show, and I think I've defined it, but it's sort of this idea that the end of the world is more likely than the end of capitalism. And the way that we talk about climate change is really, really emblematic in that. We talk about how climate change is literally killing the earth, and it is. It absolutely is. But there's this sense that there's nothing that we can do about it because the rails of possibility are too narrow. So like a world outside of capitalism is almost unthinkable because of the way, the many ways that the sort of like logic and thought process of capitalism is like reinforced constantly. So like maybe I'm gonna have to do an outline and prepare like a whole thing on it. But definitely like very good analysis of where we're at, I think.
But I have to say, we're capitalist, and that's just the way it is.
So, what can we take away from this trend of viewing capitalism less and less favorably? For starters, it's been a long time coming, and those in power have probably been expecting it. Decades of brutalizing the working class and crushing any remnants of the American dream would inevitably lead to a nationwide loss of faith in capitalism.
Maybe capitalism will end after the world ends, and we'd have socialism after that. Yeah, maybe so.
Eventually. That being said, the shift is coming at a very dangerous time. Climate change has put a time limit on any attempts at implementing a better, more common-sense economic system that is capable of handling the coming crises. As the fallout from climate change worsens, we will begin to hear more eugenicist rhetoric about the Earth's carrying capacity, overpopulation, and the replacement of the, quote, white race. While many young people are beginning to understand that socialism is the solution, there is a very real counterinsurgency that advocates for a sort of eco-fascism, a supposed solution to climate change that really just further entrenches inequality and the will of global capital. Any good Marxist will be able to tell you that fascism is a natural outgrowth of capitalism in crisis. When things
Girl Gritty rated me today, that was with a party of two. Thanks to that from this morning. If you're still in here, hell yeah.
Get bad, fascists circle the wagon around finance capital and begin to lash out. We have
I might have to do that. I just have to bust the old book out. I think I still have my copy here. I might have lent it away. I might need to get a new one. But that would be that. I mean, it would be an interesting. It would give me an opportunity to reread the book, if nothing else.
Or take 15 or 20 years before things potentially get really bad. As the older generations
Pacific Northwest right now is I have never seen anything like it. Like I'm talking to people, and also look at like Idaho and fucking Montana, almost 120 degrees. Holy shit.
Continue to die off if they are replaced by young people who hold on to their strong egalitarian socialist values. We stand a reasonable chance of enacting positive change and dismantling the system that makes these crises inevitable. If, however, the climate crisis accelerates at a rate that outpaces the growth of socialist sentiment and class solidarity in the
Give me a whisper, Kevin, the Kevin FM. Give me a whisper and we can talk about it.
The US and the rest of the imperial core, things could get pretty grim. There's a common expression in socialist circles. Our two possible futures are socialism or barbarism. It acknowledges the fact that if we do not reach a consensus that every human being has the right to a decent life, that every nation has the right to self-determination free from imperialist oppression, and that the Earth is a finite resource we all share, the worst forces within the existing system will come to the forefront and make existence a living hell for the vast majority of the population. I get a lot of comments on my videos about this current stage of capitalism resembling a technologically advanced form of feudalism. That is more or less correct. As capital tightens its grip on the productive forces, as it claims the last scraps of land, snaps up the planet's remaining resources, and extracts the last bit of value it can squeeze from the working population, we will see the final phase of capitalism. Those who previously had little will have nothing at all. Those who considered themselves middle class will be financially ruined, and those who owned much will own everything. There cannot be infinite growth on a planet with finite resources. Now, don't freak out too much. We're extrapolating quite a bit from this relatively tiny bit of information. Yes, this most recent poll tracks pretty closely with other similar polling, but trends can and do change. I genuinely believe we'll see an increase in the rate of socialism's resurgence in the coming years. There's simply no reason for any normal person to defend capitalism anymore. It just doesn't work for working people. If the American faith in capitalism fades just enough, people will begin to realize that there's a wealth of information on alternative, successful, common sense economics to implement. Socialism is tried and tested. The policies work. The only people who claim otherwise either have a vested interest in maintaining the predatory status quo or are simply unaware of the extent to
The
which
Cuban doctors are like the MVPs of COVID, by the way. Like they basically, like Cuba basically was able to like tamp down on COVID almost immediately, and they were basically sending their doctors to like help people in other places in other countries. Could you imagine the U.S. doing that? Like the idea of like even the vaccine was like we need to make sure that we have all of the Americans who won't take the vaccine, give them an opportunity to deny it essentially, and then we'll let other people have it.
capitalist nations meddle in foreign affairs, foment coups in socialist nations, and do their very best to crush budding left-wing governments before they ever have a chance to show the world how amazing they are. And even still, with
Good
all the
morning,
military might of the
watermelon
imperialist powers, all the most sophisticated propaganda campaigns, with all the money in the world, the US cannot hide all of socialism's successes. Vietnam had the best COVID response in the world. Cuba sent their world-class doctors to the places that needed them most, without any expectation of financial gain. And they've developed their own vaccine that's among the most effective in the world, despite decades of inhumane and unjustified US
You
sanctions.
can imagine the U.S. doctor blockade.
Socialist policies have lifted millions out of poverty, ended famines, raised life expectancies, provided vaccines for the needy, and improved literacy rates many times over. People are losing faith in capitalism because these things are becoming common knowledge. We know the policies work. The internet is a powerful tool for learning the actual history of the world, not the sanitized and whitewashed version we're taught in school. There are alternatives. And if capitalism is increasingly turning into a techno-dystopia, we should try those alternatives. Okay, it's one thing to point to trends and say, this could be good if it works out, or bad if it doesn't. But we want to ensure a good outcome, right? So, what can average people do to help facilitate the decline of faith in capitalism and the rise in popularity of socialism? Well, to be honest, capitalism is doing a good job of destroying its own image at the moment.
Right.
If young people can't afford to have kids, or own a home, or go on vacation, or save up to retire,
Or just like literally get out of debt. Like get out of student debt. Like that is already too much to ask to get out of student debt.
the myth of the American dream evaporates pretty quickly. That being said, it's more difficult to make the jump from capitalism bad to socialism good. The best thing we can do is help others. Not help them understand socialism, but actually help them. Is there a mutual aid effort you can donate to or volunteer to help? Do it. Do you have experience fighting evictions or building tenants unions? Offer to help those who are struggling against their landlords. If you're a lawyer, offer pro bono assistance to those under the boot of the ruling class. If you go out to eat or take an Uber, always tip well. When people need help, historically, it's the socialists who are first to lend a hand. Socialism has a strong tradition of caring for your fellow human beings, and we need to make sure that continues. As for helping people understand socialism, the nice thing is that you can find PDF copies of most socialist literature online for free. Send links, start reading groups with your friends, print and distribute copies to anyone who is interested, put up flyers with links or QR codes. Or if you have physical copies of socialist books, leave them in little free libraries. And don't worry, books aren't the only way to help explain left theory. There are plenty of podcasts and YouTube channels too.
Yeah, like Good Morning Comrade.
I'll leave some recommendations in the description, but I've also got a bunch of links on my website for easy access. Americans are finally waking up to the fact that socialism isn't scary. If anything, it's the opposite. It's a way.
That's capitalism. Street Fight does that a lot too. The good boys over at Street Fight. That's a capitalism. Is one of the things that they do over there.
To liberate the entire population of the world, to lift the boot of the oppressor, the warmonger, and the invader. It's an ideology that is opposed to the genocidal greed, xenophobia, and hatred of capitalism, traits that will only continue to get worse as global economic and ecological crises intensify. If we want to secure a livable future for our children, if we want to see a world where everyone is truly free, we have the blueprint. We just need to take the initiative and make it happen.
All right, there you go. I sniped that ad way before I can get in. Way before it could even hit us. All right, folks. Who's live? Let's see who's live. I'm over my time again. Ben's live. Who else is live? We rated him yesterday. Who's live today? Do we need to hit Ben? Let's do Ben again. All right, folks. We're gonna raid Bleep Blanc Ben on Twitch. Ben is very good, very smart. Gonna talk about some leftist theory. Always talking about the news. So let's go ahead and raid Bleep Blomp Ben. Everybody else who is on YouTube and Facebook, goodbye. I love you. All right.